Snow White, the remake, just came to Disney Plus. I didn't see it in the theaters. I'll get to that later and how that relates to 3D. To start with the original Snow White, this movie has been remastered in 4K. It's a noticeable upgrade, especially if you're watching on a large screen such as a 4K projector. And while it is much of the movie that is now at this new highest quality, it's not consistent entirely throughout. I'm not sure if they perhaps didn't have access to all the original elements. Perhaps most of it came from a negative and some came from theatrical prints, which, even though that is still film, there is major generational loss between a negative and prints. So I'm just theorizing, maybe that's why some shots have a softer look, and then some shots look like they were 1080p from the previous HD version and upscaled, and some shots look downright standard definition, at albeit a clean standard definition, but still noticeably less clarity, perhaps as if it was upscaled or softened and edited in. So maybe some of these shots were just not available in good condition enough to rescan. After all, this is a very old movie, the world's first animated feature film from the 1930s. But regardless, most of the movie makes full use of 4K and looks stunning, not only in the subtleties of the animation work, but also in the live action opening and closing with the now stereotypical opening storybook and the gilt lettering, which takes on real shimmering life. And as for the movie quality itself, beyond the technical stuff, it holds up very well for its age. I mean, of course, there's little things here and there that give away trends of the time, such as certain singing choices and whatnot. In fact, the song Whistle While You Work sounds kind of similar to the song from a competing animated feature film which came out shortly thereafter, Gulliver's Travels, from Flesher Studios. It's a happy day. But in the grand scheme of things, that was so minimal. And it helps too that it's just one of those stories, simple but powerful stories that many people can relate to. I mean, besides the fantasy elements, obviously, the family drama, to say the least. And the rating system didn't exist yet, but when it finally did, this was given a G rating. This was back when, the rating systems had a little more common sense. And it highlights the absurdity of the stuff that gets PG nowadays, like Paw Patrol. Imagery of her frolicking with the forest animals might make people forget Snow White had some positively dark stuff in there. Some sequences of nightmare-inducing animation, stylized. The evil queen walking into her dungeon. See her pass by a couple of the men she's tortured and killed. One of them just is tortured by a jar of water that's just out of reach. And then down to the queen's death, which rivaled other dark Disney deaths in decades to come, like The Lion King and Tarzan. And now on to the remake. This has had some controversy, some haters, and we'll get to all that. First, let's break it down. I think it's roughly 20 minutes longer than the original, which isn't huge. And you got to consider that movies nowadays have very long end credits. Many close in on 10 minutes. I didn't time this one, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's not too far behind that. So really, it's not that much longer than the original. And what's nice is what they did with that extra time. They didn't just fill it with fluff or extend the action sequences to the point of being just boring, which is often done today. What they did was they added to the character development of the character formerly known as Prince Charming. He was kind of a prop in the original movie. You don't know anything about him. They fall in love, quote unquote, but again, no real information or context given there. And in the new movie, his name is Jonathan, and he's not a prince. In fact, he's you could call him a criminal under the oppressive rule of the evil queen. So that was necessary to work in to round out the story and make it more believable. And at the same time, they didn't take away from the comedic dwarf antics, which made up a good amount of the original. And speaking of dwarves, uh, that's not what they are. Not in this version. They are supposed to be unknown magic creatures of some type. The, the point is that they don't even care what they're called as or what their backstory is, just as long as they're anything but midgets. And there was something in the news about the famous actor Peter Dinklage making comments uh, that discouraged any such appropriate casting, and really the removal of the Seven Dwarfs from the title of the movie. Because remember, the original was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This is just Snow White, even though they're among the main characters. They're just seven who knows what. And some would say that's more offensive. Dwarf erasure, if you want to call it that. I'm sure there's a better word for it. But yeah, some actors who are little people were actually offended that he spoke for everyone and potentially took away jobs from people who had no problem at all being cast in roles like that. And during production, a picture leaked from outdoors filming that was taken from a distance of these seven characters that some were dwarves, some were, or whatever the current medical terminology is, I have no idea, but we all know what I'm talking about. Some were just shorter than average, but there were seven characters, and this caused some uproar among fans who thought that they bear no resemblance to the original. And then we watched the movie, and we come to find out that they're Jonathan's band of friends. And then we've got the seven, not dwarves, as separate, bizarrely computer animated characters. So was this a mistake based on that leaked photo? I'm actually not convinced that it was, because this movie had reshoots and re-edits and was delayed an entire year. Yes, there was an actor strike at some point, but honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually used those reshoots and edits to make them two distinct group of characters, because remember, they're both groups of seven, and both happen to have short characters. And if you watch the movie, you can see how easily that could have been done with a few key shots, a few key lines reworked into making them distinct characters. Or maybe it was just a writing coincidence, who knows? One mirroring the other. It would be interesting to find out at some point, although I doubt that'll ever happen. And one of the other things that might have been changed was the love story, because it does have a romantic element with Snow White. So, but early on, the actress made some very harsh comments berating the original and implying that there was no romantic plot there. And you know, the usual stuff, you know, don't need no prince to save me, all that stuff. So that makes you wonder how much really was reworked, because it ended up bearing more resemblance to the original in that area. Some of the other changes were like there were some new songs added. Some meshed just fine, and some, like the Queen's song about being the fairest of all, sounded more like a postmodern theater, which did not blend, in my opinion, well with the tone. This happens, like we see with The Little Mermaid and other remakes, where they add songs in that were by different writers and, you know, actually created decades apart. You can tell it just doesn't land the same way. The rendition of Hi Ho, you know, where they're coming home from work in the mines, I thought they did a good job with that. It was very catchy, new reworking of the song, lots of pretty visuals that the kids will enjoy, and I enjoyed. Kind of reminded me of a fast food toy I had when I was a kid. I had a duck, in fact, and he had a little cart with his gemstones and one big gemstone in the middle that would spin around when you roll it. But I'm getting off track. That's what it reminded me of, though. Very pretty visuals. The whole scene with the huntsman who is ordered to assassinate Snow White on the pretense of going in the woods. That's always just a powerful scene by its very nature, and that can be made more like emotionally gripping based on the writing and the performances. I've seen good ones elsewhere, like the silent version, and even the Three Stooges version, which I enjoyed. Many people probably haven't seen that, but Three Stooges made a great CinemaScope color epic Snow White. Check it out. But anyway, that scene with the huntsman, I think it just worked in this movie efficiently, um, but it was sort of by rote. I've seen better, and they did swap a story element for some reason instead of putting the heart of a pig in the box to fool the queen, which makes sense. You put an apple in the box as if she wouldn't even check, which and she didn't until way later, which I didn't think that kind of took me out. That didn't make too much sense. And on a positive note, the not dwarf named Dopey, they gave him a nice story arc. Um, he was always one of the more likable characters in the original, but I really like what they did with him here. You probably already seen some spoilers if you haven't seen the movie already, but I'm not even going to get into it, just in case you haven't. But I really like the way they handled his character, and what they even tied in the song Whistle While You Work into his character development, which was a nice touch. And speaking of the song Whistle While You Work, that's another thing that's gotten some criticism, as if Snow White isn't earning her keep and she's making them work or something bizarre assumption like that. I think that's overblown. It was a pleasant scene. It was like the concept of, give somebody a fish or teach them to fish. That was a nice thing to do. She got helped them to take care of themselves, and she wasn't cross about it or anything. So if you were expecting that to be quote unquote woke, I hate to disappoint you. Although, funnily enough, at the end of that scene, there is one shoehorned line, and they make comedic glances to acknowledge that it's shoehorned in, saying a long convoluted sentence about government policies so-called forcing people to engage in illegal behavior. It was kind of awkward, the execution of that, and was obviously made to be some sort of political statement on the writer's end. But that being said, that is probably the most obvious example of that you would find in this movie. One other criticism that's been joked about is that it's supposedly a joke that the beautiful actress Gal Gadot isn't the fairest in the land. And I'm not going to go there. I think that's really ignorant. But regardless, it is worth noting that the magic mirror said specifically in the movie that Snow White was more beautiful because the queen's went no further than the skin, while Snow White's was deep within. However, that raises a logical contradiction. If Snow White was fairer due to inner beauty, then the mirror would have always said she was the fairest in the land, because the queen was always scheming and evil, even before Snow White grew up. So yeah, this movie was, I'd say, obviously largely due to this huge backlash based on Rachel Zegler's, some would call them obnoxious comments and bashing of the original, and also due to perceived drastic changes to the original plot. This was literally a box office bomb, not only in production costs, but let alone marketing costs, so it lost quite a few $1,000,000. However, I skipped the theater, not due to prejudice, but because it wasn't in 3D. I really didn't mind waiting a few months and watching it on my home theater. And unless it's 3D, that's more of a motivation. But nothing to do with outrage mobs or bandwagons like that, which I found are often wrong, at least for my taste. Like, a big example of that would be the Star Wars prequels. Of course, the outrage for that is really kind of outdated at this point. There's viewed more positively now, but back in the day. And more recent stuff like the Little Mermaid remake, just because they changed the race of the main character. Many assumed it would be some travesty, but it wasn't. And really, as it goes with outrage mobs, same can be said for gushing mobs. People who say, "Oh, this movie is the greatest thing since sliced bread." And sorry to offend if you love these movies, but Sonic 3, For me, it came off as pretentious and yet shallow. And Star Wars The Force Awakens, uh, which for some became an almost religious experience just because it hit a few key nostalgia buttons for a very narrow generation that grew up in the 80s. And despite its massive financial success, well over $1 billion, um, right coming out of it, I knew this was a step in the wrong direction. And the same people complaining about uh, episodes 8 and 9, but which I thought were better actually. Um, and I really enjoyed many parts of them. But people complain about them and not realize and that it all started with the choices made in 7. But I'm digressing again. But you get the point. Make up your own mind. Don't let the mob think for you. If you enjoy it, great. Try to think of the reasons why. That can always be fun. Maybe you don't like to think about it. Maybe you don't like to break it down like this. I do. I find it fun. Maybe you don't at all, and that's fine too. But regardless, if you are a channel member, you are watching this in 3D in the members section. And speaking of 3D, you will also find the original version of Snow White, the first feature-length cinematic version that in fact got Disney interested in making this movie in the first place, from 1916. Yes, I have converted that movie to 3D. You can find the anaglyph version for free, and you can find the true 3D version for 3D televisions and projectors in the members section. See you later. A big example of that would be the Star Wars prequels, and make it more believingful. What is the word? Not believingful. Is not. And make it more believable